Hi, boys and girls. Miss Kathy here from Shaler North Hills Library, and we have another episode of Greek Myth Mania. We are in week 11. We did take a week off last week for holiday celebration, and this week we are focusing on the Trojan War, a big, long story in Greek myth history. So, I did not find enough about the Trojan War in Delaire's book, the one that we always use. We will be going back to that book, but for right now, I thought it was best to get an entire book out about the Trojan War. And it tells it in a simple way so that you can understand what's going on. So without further ado, let's read The Trojan Horse, retold and illustrated by Warwick Hutton, and see what this horse is all about. Crazy stuff. Let me move something I have sitting off camera here. No, it is not my cat. She is not here today. Many thousands of years ago, the Greeks and the Trojans were at war. Paris, the son of King Priam of Troy, had fallen in love with Helen, but Helen was already the wife of Menelaus, who was the king of Sparta, a Greek city. When the lovers fled to Troy, the furious Menelaus gathered a huge army of Greeks and sailed after his wife. The Greeks camped. Get you in range here. The Greeks camped before the gates of Troy, where the Trojans could look down at them from the city ramparts. Many battles were fought, and there were many brave heroes, but the armies were equally matched. For weeks, for months, for years, both sides fought, watched, waited, then fought again. Campfires flickered, guards shouted orders, horses neighed, but no side won. Then one morning, 10 years after they had arrived, the Greek army began to leave. Clouds of dust rose up. The camp echoed with shouted orders and the noisy clatter of men dismantling tents and mounting horses. The Greek soldiers, shields and swords shining in the morning sun, moved down to the shore and into the waiting ships. From the walls of Troy, the Trojans watched. As the Greek ships sailed away, the Trojans came cautiously out of the city gates. The enemy had gone, but as the clouds of dust settled over the campground, a huge shape appeared. Just see it in the distance there. There, standing alone, was an enormous horse made of wood. It had painted eyes and a bright face. The Trojans walked around it carefully. At last, Laocoon, the high priest of Troy, came out. "Never trust the Greeks," he said. "There must be some trickery in this horse." He looked at its great, round belly. Then he took a spear from a guard standing beside him and flung it at the horse's side. The spear quivered as it struck, and there was a strange hollow echo. But the Trojans were in no mood to listen to Laocoon's warning, so with his 2 young sons he departed to make a sacrifice. Meanwhile, at the water's edge, the Trojans had found a small man whose hands were bound behind him. He looked imploringly at them. "Let's kill him, he's a Greek," some said. "Oh, let him go. If the Greeks have tied him up, he's probably on our side," said others. And they began to untie him. They questioned him. "What's your name? What happened to you? Can you tell us what this great horse is for?" The man started to talk. "My name is Simon. The others were going to kill me because the high priests said that to win the war they must build this great horse as a gift for the goddess Athena and make a human sacrifice. I was to be the sacrifice. They bound me hand and foot, but I managed to free my legs and escaped and hid." The Trojans looked at each other in puzzlement as Sinon continued. "Their one great fear is that you will drag the horse into your city. Then all the goddess Athena's favor and protection will go to you instead of them, and they will never be able to win the war. To prevent this, they have carefully made the horse too big and heavy to fit between the city gates." The Trojans listened carefully. Some did not believe Sinon, but then, as if to persuade them, an extraordinary event occurred. Now, let me just interrupt this to say that this event that is about to be read, I have never heard of before. Doesn't mean it's not in the annals of Greek mythology somewhere, but I had never heard of it before, and it's not one of the more commonly associated aspects of the Trojan War and this Trojan horse, I gotta tell you. But that said, let's get back to the story because it does make everything work out. From the direction in which the Greek ships had gone, 2 enormous sea snakes appeared. They glided through the calm blue water toward Troy. As the people watched in fearful fascination, the snakes slithered from the surf, up the shore, past the wooden horse, and on to where Lycaon and his sons were sacrificing a bull. With terrible ferocity, the snakes struck, twisting their bodies first around the sons and then the father. They killed all 3. The Trojans looked on in horror. "It must be a sign. The gods have punished Lycaon for doubting the wooden horse," they said. "And then let us widen the city gates and pull it through. Get tree trunks. We'll move the horse with rollers." So now the rest of this kind of continues as more normal. With ropes and rollers, they started to move the horse. As they pulled, some said they could hear a curious metallic echo that seemed to come from inside the huge wooden body. But the singing and shouting of happy Trojans soon drowned out all other sounds, and the wooden horse moved forward. At last, after the city gates had been widened, the great wooden horse stood in the central square of Troy. It seemed to smile down at the people as they danced around it and sang of their new freedom. Evening came, and then the night. Exhausted by the day's excitement and triumph, the Trojans went to their beds and fell into a deep and peaceful sleep. That night, there was no moon. Inky darkness covered Troy. It covered the seashore outside the city walls, and out to sea there was a deeper blackness. The painted eyes of the wooden horse stared at the night. On the city ramparts, Sinon was watching through the darkness, looking out to sea. Suddenly there was a golden flicker of fire, a signal from a ship. Sinon stood up. He had been waiting for that signal. The Greek ships had returned. Quickly and quietly he moved down and across the square to where the horse was standing. So this was the prisoner that they caught. He apparently is being let to run free inside their city right now. And he sees the signal. Inside the horse, it was hot and dark. Instead of being solid wood, the great body was hollow, and it was filled with armed men. Armor, swords, and helmets gleamed in the weak light of one tiny lamp. On the outside, Sinon put up a ladder, climbed to the side of the belly, and opened a trap door. A host of armed soldiers poured out. Their swords and shields clanged in the dark, but they moved quickly. Soon the sleeping guards were captured. The city gates already lay open, destroyed to bring in the horse. In the darkness, the Greek army had landed again on the shore, and now a horde of soldiers entered into the city. That night, 10 years of waiting were over. Greek soldiers swarmed through Troy, burning, breaking, and destroying the city. People ran everywhere in confusion, trying to find their friends and belongings. The Greeks gathered rich plunder, and by morning the Trojans, who were still alive, left their broken city in a weeping trail of conquered people. And there's a picture. No writing on this page, just a picture of the people leaving the burning city. Everyone had forgotten Paris and Helen, who had started it all, but there in the city square stood the wooden horse, and over the smoking ruins of Troy its bright painted eyes still gazed. And that is the end. Tells us a little bit more on this intro part up here. In ancient times, Helen, who was the beautiful wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, and Paris, who was the son of King Priam of Troy, fell in love. When they fled, Menelaus sent the army after him. For 10 years they fought, but neither side won. Then without warning, the Greek army sailed away. Was the army giving up at last? As the dust settled, the Trojans saw what the Greeks had left behind. They sang and danced to celebrate victory. But this ends up being a tragic story of the way in which the Trojans were tricked by the Greeks and lost the long war. And to this day, there is an expression, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. And that's because they thought that this was a gift from the Greeks, that they would now have Athena's favor. But beware, it was also their downfall. Okay, so let's look at our packet here, Greek Myth Mania. If you had a chance to print it out, this was the guide page. Learn more about the war in general at that site. And then there's one that you can take a quiz on ancient Greece at that site. And then we get a word search. It is a little bit tricky, and a lot of these names, Greek names, were very long and had strange for us today spellings, so it's a little bit tricky, I will give you that. And if you want an easier one, there are other word searches you can find on the internet. But for kids who might be a little bit older and just want a challenge, we have that one. And we have a crossword puzzle, and again, I give you the answers to that because many of those answers are not ones that we encountered in our story. You have to do some other looking. But if you're interested in reading more about the Trojan War, you can do so and probably get a lot of those answers there. And then there's a timeline site that will step you through the events of the war. And another site that has some good links. Then there was a coloring page of the Trojan horse. Now that was a little bit easier than the crossword puzzle or the word search. And then there was a template for making a Trojan horse that was pictured on the front main page there. So I thought when I put this in the packet, oh, that's going to be easy. You just cut that out and you put the box in the middle and you glue it all up and you put wheels on. Turns out there were no directions and it's a little bit trickier than it looked, I gotta tell you. So this is how mine came out. Let me pull this over here and show you my Trojan horse. It did, like I say, take a little longer than expected, and if kids are doing this, you're going to need more than your own two hands. It helps to have someone else, especially when you're trying to get it all put together. Now, I gave you the templates in your packet, but the problem I didn't realize, I only got one template off the internet, and that is when you're looking at his left side and it's facing forward. So ideally, you would want one from the other side where you're looking at his right side facing forward. So you can have a front and a back to this horse. Right now I have two templates with the exact same thing on them. So I put them on both sides as you can see in this video. But if I turn it around, it's just white on this side. So there are ways you can play with that printout and get it to be flipped around, the PDF, if mom or dad or somebody has some computer knowledge and can figure that out. You can print it out and get the reverse image. But if you want to just do it like this too, that works. Younger kids may just want to cut it out and make the flat image instead of trying to do it 3D like this, because it does get a little bit tricky, like I said. If you're going to do it 3D, what I did was then I glued the template to a piece of very thin cardboard so that it was a little more sturdy, because doing it with paper would probably be a little bit tricky. But you can do it however you want. You can print it on a little bit heavier paper if you want. That may work as well. Some other tricks, I would say, when you're gluing, they give you a template for a box. The wheels keep coming off too because I think I made the holes too big. And I don't want to glue them because then they won't roll. But when you are gluing the yolks to this box, you have to cut out this shape on my thumb side of the paper and fold it up and make a little box. And you glue that to the yolk, which is these two tall things here. You want to make sure you glue it at the bottom of the yolk, because otherwise you have to cut slits that are too big in your horse, and it will make it much more flimsy if you have to come down all the way to the bottom of the horse. So glue the box that you make to the bottom of the yolks and have them just stick up at the top. What else can I tell you that I did? Then they give you a base piece. That's what goes in the middle here. You can see it there at the bottom, and glues to both sides of the template. Again, whatever you're going to use to put through your tires, your wheels, maybe use that to make the holes, because I used one thing to make the holes, and then I used a toothpick to be the axle that held the wheels together, and the holes are too big, so they keep coming off. Other than that, Just the fact that it's two-sided on this side and white on the other, I don't think there's any other problems with it, but again, allow yourself a little time if you want to try to do it three-dimensional. And I think that was all that I had on the packet. I did find some other articles and things I wanted to share with you. Wanted to read through this blank sheet. Since this book kind of mainly talked about the horse, I was going to go through this fill-in-the-blank sheet about the war in general as told in Homer's Iliad, which is a very famous poem that tells about all the traumas of the Trojan War. And it has some blanks here. In order to ensure the fleet's voyage to Troy, the commander, Agamemnon, sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia. He told her she was going to marry Achilles, who was one of the very famous warriors from his town. The story mostly focuses on the last year of a 10-year war. We know it went on and on and on for 9 years, and then most of the story takes place in that last year. The Greeks have been unable to penetrate the great wall that surrounds the city of Troy. Feuding and interfering, gods constantly use humans as their pawns. So the gods were taking a side in this battle. Some were for Troy, some were for the Greeks. And that's part of the reason that it kept going on and on for 10 years. At first, Achilles, whose goddess mother tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx, refused to fight. He's pouting because of a spat he has had with Agamemnon. But during a truce, Menelaus and Paris square off in a battle, just the two of them. But just before Menelaus is about to kill Paris, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, whisks Paris to safety. The truce is broken by a stray Trojan arrow shot at Menelaus. Alas. Diomedes, with Athena's help, slays Trojan left and right. He's on fire as far as fighting goes. He even stabs Ares, the god of war, in the chest. But since Ares is immortal, it doesn't do him any harm. I'm going to skip over some of that because we may do Achilles as another week. But just saying, Menelaus wins Helen back. But we don't see that in the Iliad. We see that in the Odyssey. Okay, let's take one more look at another aspect of the war given in slide pages. This was supposed to be like a PowerPoint presentation. There was once a woman named Helen, daughter of Zeus and mortal Leda, most beautiful woman in the world, sought after by many for marriage, but she chose Menelaus. Happily, she was fine with that idea. Little did anyone know, Paris, with the help of Aphrodite, persuaded Helen to run away with him. Menelaus knew his only choice was to fight for his wife back, and we know about that. The great army was assembled and led by Agamemnon, who was Menelaus' brother, Achilles, and Odysseus, who we will definitely read about in a future week or two here, because he is another very famous Greek hero. Odysseus ruled Ithaca. He had a wife, Penelope. We're not going to go into him right now because we will do him another week. Paris's brother Hector realized his brother made an awful mistake but had to help him protect the city. The Greeks could not break through. Then we have the Trojan horse. Odysseus had an idea. Pretend to abandon it. And it does mention on this PowerPoint that the sea serpent rose out of the water and killed Laocoon. So maybe it was just me that had never heard of it. The Trojans partied. Helen was taken back to Sparta with Menelaus. We know about that. What's next? And then we have Odysseus's journey. which is what we're going to read about next, and his travels. So we won't go into any more of that right now, but I think that gives you the main bulk of the Trojan War, except for maybe the one hero, Achilles, who we will probably talk about in another week. And we will get to Odysseus as well. But that gives you the main focus on the Trojan War, which was a major event in Greek mythological times. And to this day, researchers are not sure if the Trojan War really happened or not, but there is evidence that it might have. So you can come into Shaler Public Library and pick up books for yourself, more books about the Greek myths and the Trojan War, or whatever else you care about. We are open 6 days a week. Just check the website for the hours. And if you're not comfortable coming in, we're more than happy to pull books for you and deliver them to our pickup window. So whatever you are most comfortable doing, we are here to help you. So please come visit us if you want to do it that way. We are always happy to have visitors. And please keep watching us online. We love that too. Thank you for watching today, and I will see you in a future week for more episodes of Greek Myth Mania. Thanks for watching. This has been Miss Kathy from Shaler North Hills Library. Bye.